Hi and welcome to this video where I'm coloring my last snake for the Year of the Snake in Seasons by Hanna Karlzon. If you're new to this channel, hi, my name is Ina. If not, welcome back. So far, I've already colored 3 snakes for the Year of the Snake. One in Astrology by Anna Jaren, then in Mystic Animals by Stratton Peterson, and in Nature's Magic, also by Stratton Peterson. I tried to color all 3 snakes in a relatively realistic style. But since the snake here in season is adorned with jewelry, I thought I would switch things up and color it in a more vibrant and imaginative way. As you can see, I've already taped off the border with a narrow washi tape to get a nice sharp-edged white border, because I want to use watercolors in pink and purple. I aim to create some texture using cling film. I'll be using these 3 shades here: a lighter pink, a darker pink, and a purple. And I want to mix them up with white to make them a bit lighter and a little bit more pastel. I'm using the lid of another watercolor set as a palette, since its separate sections are well defined and spacious, allowing me to mix a good amount of paint. Now I'm clipping the corners of the page with some clamps to prevent it from warping due to the moisture. The washi tape I'm using to protect the other side keeps peeling off slightly since I'm reusing it, but we'll just ignore that for now. Here you see me mixing the colors. I spent a long time, actually several months, thinking about how to design the background for this page. I've been wanting to color the snake for quite some time, and I'm glad I managed to do it within the Year of the Snake. My first sensible idea was to paint blossoms in the background. 2 large ones at the bottom where there's empty space, and several smaller ones around the snake and the 2 big blossoms. But then I thought they might distract too much from the snake, which is the main focus. My second idea was to use the watercolors which I'm using now and sprinkle salt on them to create a special texture. I tried this on watercolor paper, and while it worked, it didn't turn out as well as I had imagined. I experimented with salt grains of different sizes and varying amounts of water, but none of the results really convinced me. Even after watching videos from others where it worked better, I couldn't get it to work that way. I think it might be due to the color. Perhaps the binder isn't ideal for this technique. I'm not sure. I did read that the effect varies depending on the type of watercolors you use. Additionally, I have the problem that I don't have watercolor paper in my coloring book. So I tested how the effect turns out with cling film, and I like that much better. That's why I'm going with this technique here now. For those who don't know how it works, I quick explain it. You apply the watercolor as you can see here. using a sufficient amount of water. It doesn't have to be completely soaked, but the paint shouldn't be too dry either. So you apply the paint to the paper and then place the cling film on the still wet paint, creating folds in it however you like it. Then you simply let it dry, and this creates a unique texture. Where the cling film touches the paper, the paint dries darker, and where it doesn't touch, it dries lighter. While painting, I quickly noticed that the paper absorbs the moisture quite intensely, which probably made the paint too dry to apply the cling film effectively. So I added more paint and placed the cling film on this small section and create folds. On the left side you can already see the effect quite well, while on the right side the paint had dried too much. And that's why I re-moistened it with a bit of water. My idea was to lift the cling film and continue piece by piece. But the problem is that every time the cling film moves, it also shifts slightly in the areas where it's already on the paint. That's why I only did this on a small section here. In general, my plan was to use the dark purple on the outer edges and gradually lighten it towards the center. Now you can see how I fold down the cling film and immediately noticed that it had shifted slightly again at the top. Another issue is that if the paint is too wet, it flows along the cling film and onto the illustration. Now I've colored the next area and deliberately left the section above it blank to do later once the other color has completely dried. Here too, the color slightly flows onto the snake's body. To let this area dry properly for now, I'm continuing at the bottom of the page. Unfortunately, you can't see it very well here, but you can still catch a glimpse. When I researched this topic, I read that you should let it dry for several hours, preferable overnight. However, since the paint dried so quickly during application, 10 to 15 minutes were sufficient here. So now I let it dry completely. Here you can see the result. I really like the texture. By the way, the cling film can be easily removed once it's dry. It doesn't really stick or anything, so that's not a problem at all. And if you use the same colors, you can use it several times, if not too much paint is stuck to the foil. Now I'm trying it with water first. And yes, my brush was still a bit dirty, and the water is also a little murky. But since I'm working with the same colors, it's not a big deal in this case. Again, I quickly realized that moistening the paper beforehand doesn't really help. You can even see a bit how the paper suffers from too much moisture in those small spots you can see there. It's not necessarily due to the water itself, but rather because I rub over the same spot again when applying the paint. If the water weren't absorbed by the paper immediately, I could simply dab the paint onto the water and it would spread on its own. But that doesn't work with this paper. So I just re-moistened the entire area a bit afterwards with some water that I carefully dab onto the paint, and then I place the cling film over it and create folds piece by piece the way I liked it. In between, I moistened some spots a little more. Where the paint had run onto the illustration, I tried to wipe it off a bit, but that only worked partially. At the transition to the already dried section, I applied some more paint. To let this area dry thoroughly, I continued working at the bottom of the page and placed an extra piece of cling film there to move the other part as little as possible. Then I also let that dry. In the third round, I applied the paint directly without pre-moistening the paper. I started with a relatively broad application and then went over it again with additional paint and water before placing the cling film. That actually worked best. And then I have to let the whole thing dry again. You can tell I spent a lot of time letting the paint dry. Here you can see the finished result, and I really like the texture. Maybe I should have diluted the colors a bit more to make them a little lighter, but for the first attempt, I'm quite happy with it. Next, I'm trying to remove the paint from the illustration with a damp brush, using both the brush and a cloth. Last year I said I didn't need masking fluid, but since I would like to work more with watercolor this year, I've now reached the point where I should probably get some. That way I wouldn't have the problem with all the paint spots. Now I'm continuing with the snake, which I'm basing with watercolor pencils. The snake will have a gradient from purple at the head, transitioning through blue and ending with turquoise at the tail. Then I'll activate the watercolor pencil with my water tank brush. After that's dried, I remove the washi tape. That moment is always so satisfying. Now I'm coloring the snake with my soft touch colored pencils from Castle Arts, which I've already set aside. I'm using several color combinations, ranging from purple through different shades of blue to turquoise. I decided not to shade every scale individually, but to make the edges of the snail darker and the middle lighter, to create a rounded effect. Along the way, I keep estimating how large the individual color areas need to be so that the colors are distributed evenly across the snake's body. Some of the color that bled onto the illustration is still slightly visible, but it's manageable. Next time I really should use masking fluid. The tongue of the snake is now going to be purple, and the diamond or gemstone will be turquoise, to pick up the color from the opposite side down here. Now I'm focusing on all the small gemstones in the jewelry, using turquoise and purple as well. For the pearls, I shade the shadow area with a pink colored pencil and then apply a pink metallic watercolor to give them a pearlescent shimmer. Currently, all the colors I'm using are adjacent on the color wheel, from pink through purple to blue and turquoise, creating a very harmonious effect. For contrast, I'm now using the complementary color for the jewelry, yellow, or rather a golden gel pen. For the eyes, I'm using a glitter gel pen in yellow. Finally, I added highlights to the jewelry with my white gel pen from Sakura. Then I traced the lines of the gemstones and added highlights to the brightest scales of the snake. And with that, the page is finished. I hope the video was helpful and interesting for you. Bye and see you next time.